MK Malefane. Thank you for joining us here in the studio, and thank you for coming through. So I suppose it's very hard to start anywhere else, and I know we've got so much we're going to talk about, but you know, when you have that line that says, the message you delivered said, Winnie says yes. What was the question? If you are able to share with us now.
Well, you know, there's been a lot of messages, a good number of messages from Mama to Mama Fatima Meya. Much as there's been speculation about what that message was, and of course when one traveled to Durban, it was really to follow up on our social work or welfare projects in the Brandfort and the surrounding farming communities to raise medicines, food, you know, parcels, etc., which we duly did, and which, of course, Fatima Meya duly mobilized the business community in Durban to contribute towards too. But it was really a cover for the underground work I was doing on her behalf. The message was around questions and concerns that were being raised in the underground movement and in some quarters in exile as to what appeared to be emanating from Brandfort, from her, for the mobilization for establishment of a new political movement, which some interpreted to mean a new movement to compete with the ANC, when in fact it was to confirm amongst the leaders around the country, some through Fatima, that yes, there is a mandate given to this young man, MK Malefane, which has also been obviously endorsed by the leadership in exile, Chris Hani, and so forth, that there needed to be a new political movement, you know, because the ANC was banished and there was not much that it could achieve from a mass mobilization point of view, and that this movement would operate above board. And that's the message I take into.
So I take it the question was, this movement that appears to be taking shape around Brandfort, does it have the sanctioning and the mandate from the leadership in exile?
That was the message. And that movement finally and ultimately was launched in Mitchell's Plain under the name United Democratic Front, UDF. But of course, in the underground, as I was the foot soldier, actually really responsible for mobilizing leaders around, it was under the name Maluti. Maluti being a term that had been discussed by Oliver Tambo and the ANC leadership years earlier, as I got to know, for the new name of the future democratic South Africa when we got our freedom. Wow. Yes, and it was the good thing, it was across party political ideologies. It was for everybody.
So because we couldn't resist the appeal and the pull of that particular strand of the story, the message, Winnie says yes, we sort of got ahead of ourselves a little bit. So let's backtrack a little bit. How do you, MK Malefane, cross paths with Winnie Mandela and end up being so entrusted with you know, really sensitive information that she wanted to communicate and whatever operations she wanted carried out? How did you meet her, and what were the circumstances?
Well, in January, I believe, of 1980, I met Zinzi Mandela, the daughter, at their home in Orlando West. I was a Rasta, I was an artist, I was a poet, I was a musician, I was a painter, and I met a fellow artist, and we fell in love. Deeply in love with Zinzi. I don't mean romantically, I mean sure. Artistically, creatively. And she said, you have to meet my mom. I think you're just who my mom needs. And I didn't understand at the time. I went back home. When I came back, and then she called me that evening to say, please come and visit me tomorrow. You need to come and meet somebody special. When I arrived at 8115, Mama Winnie was there. She had come up, obviously on one of those few occasions when she's given permission to come, to see the doctors or to see the attorneys. And I then sat down with her for a very animated, we call it grounding exchange, not about hard politics as such only, but about the real legacy of women of African descent globally. From the US, Harriet Tubman, all the way to, Coretta Scott King, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all, the icons of the black struggle.
I take it you knew that this was someone that in the eyes of the government no one was meant to associate with. Why would you then associate yourself with Winnie Mandela?
Look, like any young man, and as an activist in the underground, but also outwardly, just an artist, a Rasta, I was intrigued. It was like, what an experience. It was a wow factor, to ultimately meet the mother of the nation, most beautiful, most everything. And we spent quite a while. Remember, she was only, at the time, allowed visits for a few minutes with individuals. But we spent such a long time that by the time we finished, and I want to say finished the first chapter of many chapters to follow, which I wasn't aware at the time, when we got out of the house, under the watchful eye of the security branch, we had a stream of comrades, senior comrades, who had come to see her and who couldn't understand. She's been held up with some young comrade. Who is he? Who is he? And why for so long? At the gate was Dr. Motlana, Ntatu Motlana. It was Farouk Asfat. It was Aubrey Mukwena. The cream of the leadership. And when I came out with her, and they thought, who is this? And then I just smiled, filed past them, and only then they could see her for a minute or two. The following day, she had to go back to Brandfort, as per the conditions of her restrictions. And Zinzi called me again and said, Mommy has to go back to Brandfort. She hasn't got a driver. Can you drive with her? And I duly obliged. And that evening, we arrived under cover of darkness in Brandfort, and I was smuggled in, obviously. When I got into the 3-roomed house, it is a small kitchenette, some stove, paraffin stove, some table, chairs, and then, of course, a bedroom with 2 single beds, and then, of course, the main lounge, the school, was the library with just a slipper couch for sitting, and then, of course, books all around the room. And then I went to the shelves. I had not sat down, and then for some reason, I picked up a book by Mary Benson, South Africa, A Struggle for a Birthright, something like that. And then I paged through, and then I came to Sharpeville. When I opened the book, the chapter on Sharpeville, and I read the events leading up to and the sequence of events, the book dropped from my hands and I was transfixed. And she thought something was wrong with me. What's wrong? I didn't tell her. Up to now, I've never told her. The truth was, I was living in Sharpeville with my mom at the time of 21 March 1960.
Sure.
I was 1 year, 11 months. She was a nurse at the local clinic, and then she would leave me with a childminder. And then when the people were all called to congregate and go and hand over their passes at the police station, the caregiver obviously carried me on her back. And then when we got to the police station and the police started shooting and everybody fled, she dropped me. And then in that pandemonium, in that stampede, somebody must have picked me up because I'm still alive. But what then happened is that, of course, my family went to exile in Lesotho after that. I had recurring nightmares every other day, every day, for as long as I could remember, until I was 13 years old. And I would wake up in a sweat, having wet the blankets. The nightmare would go like the sound of drones above, which, of course, during Sharpeville, there were aeroplanes that flew down to intimidate the people. And then there was a staccato of gunfire, and then there was a stampede of cattle or buffaloes, which were the stampede of people, you know, and then I fell, and then there's a bicycle, I just see myself on the bicycle, and then next thing, I'm in somebody's arms, a woman, in a room looking out through the window as the rain fell, which
So
turned to
seeing
blood.
that book in Mama Winnie's lounge there in Brandfort brought all those memories flooding back. But
This wasn't a nightmare, it was the reality of my
Yes.
experience at 1 year, 11 months.
Yeah.
Because of that experience, I never went back. I stayed in Brandfort.
Sure. I imagine you were talking about how when you emerged from, you know, the house, having met her for the first time, you were talking about the other comrades, the more established comrades were wondering, who is this young man? Who's this young comrade? But I also imagine that other people who were wondering, who is this young man, were the security police. You're saying that after that experience, you stayed in Brandfort. Under what conditions? How difficult was it?
Well, it was a cat and mouse, it was smuggling, it was, you know, but of course, they soon, obviously, knew that I was there. 1 or 2 times they raided in the middle of the night. I had managed to evade earlier because one of our informants had told us, you know, that they are going to raid at midnight, so I was able to escape. But of course, this one other night, I wasn't so lucky. And then they raided. I had a terrible flu, and I'd taken a lot of medication that night. So as I escaped through the window of the bedroom, and you know, it's all green and trees, and you know, she did a lot of gardening. I then crouched below the window, expecting somehow that they would get into the house, search all over, and find that this Rasta in MK, you know, Keida, was not there, this terrorist, and they would leave. And I fell asleep. I could have just jumped the fence and I'd been gone. I fell asleep, they woke me up with blows, you know, hitting on me, and then they arrested me. And that's how I got detained.
Not a good condition
Yes.
for an underground operative to...
Not a good, yes. But of course, after the detention of several weeks, I was released because they believed they had a watertight case against Mama Winnie. This time, she had broken her bending orders, she was going to go to jail. So they relaxed in their defense, or not their defense, in their case against her, and did not expect that Mama Winnie would bring a team of her top legal minds from, you know, Judge Bezos, etc. And when we got to court, unknown even to our legal team, who could not stop to, you know, to chastise her, that how could you do this? And, you know, and we've known about this young man, he's been here for a while, you know, and now we can't even defend you because there's witnesses. You know, the system had lined up a whole lot of witnesses who confirmed that I was living in the house, they had pictures and all. And then Mama Winnie said, I will tell you what your defense is when we get there. She became the lawyer. You know, and then when we got to court and they read out the charge sheet and all the witnesses, and how does she plead? She said, not guilty. They laughed, they thought it was a joke. She said, I'm not guilty because he's not a visitor, he's not a stranger. He is a member of the Mandela family. He is a member of the household, everybody knows this, you know.
Wow.
To cut a long story short, we won the case. So I was legally declared a Mandela. So I am actually officially, by court order, MK Malefane Mandela.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me about that experience of Brandfort. In a way, it was meant to isolate her and make sure that she's forgotten by the South African public who clearly embraced her. But also it was to break her. And I've seen 1 or 2 interviews where she talks about the loneliness of the experience and how it challenged her at an intellectual level because they made sure that they drop her in a place where she could not really easily relate and engage in those political debates, you know, as she would have wanted to, but she didn't let that stop her. How damaging was that experience to her, and how difficult was it for her to live through?
You know, Brandfort is the heart of apartheid. Vervoet and the other military and intellectual giants of Afrikanerdom came from Brandfort. So they decided Brandfort would be the final place that she would never come out of. And of course, the people had been terrified, you know, and they made sure that when she arrives, all they could see was this animal ANC terrorist communist that needed to be isolated. Of course, the opposite happened. Even the white community, after a while, began to warm up to her because they would come with their own problems to her. They saw her as their mother of the nation, and she assisted where she could. Farming communities would come to her. So what was intended to become torture became, in a sense, blessing for the people of Brandfort and the surrounding communities. Because for the first time, he was somebody who looked like them, black, even beautiful at that, who fought with them and fought their wars. And then she just became the focal point for everybody. And of course, everybody in Brandfort had not seen dignitaries, not just nationally in South Africa, but from overseas, coming there, the Kennedys and everybody. And they couldn't understand, who's this black woman who the whole world revolves around? Who the whole world worships and talks to and comes and visits.
Were you at home in Brandfort?
I was with her.
When Senator Kennedy came through?
I'm the one that prepared for the visit of Senator Kennedy.
Yeah.
As well as with all the other visitors that came.
And of course, there are many visitors that came, but the significance of this visit, I imagine, was that here was this woman who had de facto become the voice of the struggle of the people of South Africa in a situation where leaders were either in exile or in prison, as some of them did, and she had carried out the message to make sure that those leaders are not forgotten. How significant was that visit?
The Kennedy visit, the Kennedys being really the political family, leaders of the American people and of course the world. It was significant because it demonstrated just how powerful the new icon, Nelson Mandela, and of course Winnie Mandela more than Nelson, because it was really her who carried the torch. It was really her that the world reflected on and listened to when they wanted to hear about South Africa, the ANC, about Nelson Mandela. So it was significant that the Kennedys, who are the leading family of the #1 power, in the world, America, would humble themselves and come to Brandfort, to receive counsel and break bread with her.
Sure.
It had global ripple, effects.
It's kind of a difficult question that I'm going to ask you, but what's your best Winnie Mandela moment? And I'm hoping here that you, from the many experiences over the years, you'll probably be able to pick out, an instance that the rest of us may not be privy to, that really stands out from the time that you spent with her.
There are a number of moments, really. There isn't really one moment.
Sure.
I can mention maybe a few. I am going to be writing a book finally. She asked me to do that recently, before her passing. It was to watch her go through the pain of treachery by the system. I mean, they'd done everything they could to her. They'd put her in isolation and jail, etc. But one of the moments that is forever etched on my mind was when her banning order was about to finish. And the system, the senior police officer, etc., would engage with me in preparation for their visit to deliver the news. And they gave me, and I gave her, all the confidence and the impression that she was finally going back home to Soweto, to her people, to the struggle. She was still conducting the struggle in Brandfort, but now she was going to openly be free to do as she wished, to study openly, to work, to be with the people openly. They had given me that impression, and I had communicated it to her. On the appointed day, I went and bought the best meats, the cuts, and I cooked for them. And then it was the Minister of Police, it was the Minister of State Security, all the senior, generals in government and ministers. They came, they filed in, we fed them, and then after beautiful lunch, they started talking about what a great mother of the nation she is. And she was like, for who? She said, no, 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 you are our mother too, you know?
Wow.
And then they regretted why the country was in the situation that it was, why we can't live together.
In that house.
In that house, that
Yeah.
why can't we be one nation that we really are, to have her as the first president of South Africa. You know, they were saying all of these beautiful things. And then when it was time now to hand over the envelope, the document, which then says whether she's unbanished to go back to home to Soweto or they continue, they all filed out.
Wow.
In silence. And then I looked at her, she looked at me bewildered. I mean, the main purpose of the visit had not been fulfilled. So I followed them. I said, what's going on, gentlemen? They looked at each other. None had the guts, or as I may even say the balls, to go and deliver the news. So ultimately, I took the envelope from them, and then I went and opened it with her. They had extended the banning order. None of them had the guts to tell her that you are still a threat to the state.
Wow.
You know, I looked at her, her eyes filled, not with tears, with some, they became hazy. I sat her down, and then, you know, such expectation. But then she quickly, recovered her composure.
Sure.
You know, and then she became who she was.
That spirit of resilience.
Yes.
The story you tell, MK Malefane, talks to me about the treasure trove of memories and history that clearly is deposited in that house in Brandfort. How disappointing has it been then for you and the Madikizela family, the Mandela family, that, you know, there were pronouncements made that this house would be turned into a museum to preserve that history, because that's an important chapter in the life story of Winnie Mandela Mandela. And monies were allocated, monies were spent, despite the denials that no monies have been spent, monies were spent. But as things stand, you're sitting with a house that's dilapidated, and the locals are seeing it as, you know, a place where social ills take place.
You know, firstly, you know, questions have been asked, especially by young South Africans, that what is so significant about this house? Yes, mother of the nation, we understand. She was banished there, but it was just a prison. Why should it be preserved? What the nation does not know in the world is that the wheels of the struggle continued to be oiled in Brandfort, where everybody from teachers, professionals, unionists, political leaders, religious leaders, everybody, traditional leaders, all under very difficult circumstances and conditions, found their way to Brandfort to consult and confer with Mama for her to continue to be the general that she was. It was in Brandfort where we managed to facilitate the transit of youth from all over the country to Lesotho, to Swaziland, and for military training. We ran a full liberation operation in Brandfort under the very nose of the system. Of course, the greatest achievement was when I would, from time to time, travel to Natal, to the Cape, all over Gauteng, and meet with political leaders, which culminated in the formation of the United Democratic Front, the mass democratic movement that accelerated the fall of apartheid. It was in Brandfort.
So there are layers and layers of stories of the liberation struggle.
And that was in Brandfort. That is the significance of Brandfort. And of course, Brandfort is really where Winnie Mandela and Nelson Mandela were born in terms of the global icons. It was in Brandfort that Mandela became Nelson Mandela, that Winnie Mandela became the global icon and leader that she was in Brandfort. That is the significance. How does our people recognize that? The house, through my intervention, by the way, my proposals to the provincial ANC leadership, ultimately they came back to me to say, Comrade MK, your proposals, your motivations have borne fruit. Funding has been allocated for the project, 1.6 million. This was in 2005, going on 2006. Then I facilitated with Zinzi a visit by the family with Mama to Brandfort. in 2006, to see the house, to reassure the community of Brandfort that we had not forgotten them.
Sure.
And that, in fact, through this museum project was going to be a whole lot of empowerment projects for the people in Brandfort, the surrounding communities, etc. I call the ANC leader in the Free State, Comrade Ace Magashule, to say, Ace, it's MK, I'm in the Free State, Mama and Zinza are following me tomorrow on a Saturday to visit the house in preparation for the museum, because we also have a lot of people internationally who want to contribute to the museum and to the projects of the Winnie Mandela legacy and Nelson Mandela. Sure. He says to me, he panics, and I don't understand why. He says, I'll call you back. He does. He says, MK, what did you say? I told him. He said, well, there's a comrade that asked to call you. He will coordinate things. We will see you all tomorrow in Brandfort. That was the last I heard from Ace. Anyway, this comrade calls me and he says, I hear you are going to my project. What do you mean your project? He says, my project. I said, comrade, can we meet? So I meet him, and then he says, look, the Winnie Mandela Museum is my project, it's my deal. I said, what do you mean? I don't understand. He says, no, I won the tender. What do you mean? What tender? He said, I won the tender, and I've done my part, so I don't see why you and Mama is coming to my project.
What year was this?
This was 2006.
Yeah.
So I say, look, comrade, let's not argue. I'm sure we'll reach an understanding. Mama Winnie and Zinzi are coming tomorrow. Can we meet in Brandfort and talk? He says, yes. He does come, and he's shocked at how the whole entire, we did not inform the community that we're coming. But once word got around that Mama Winnie is around, the entire township converged on her. People fainting, crying. And then later we're supposed to have meeting with him. He disappeared, never came back. To cut a long story short, Mama summoned Ace Magashule with his deputy Thabo Manyoni, with the mayors of the district and the local. They all came to Orlando West at her home, and we sat in there, and this young man was there, driving an Audi A6. To cut a long story short, he said, Mama, I don't know you, you don't know me. I met with MK, I told him already, I don't know why I was brought here. This is my project, I got a tender, I got the money. I divided as per instruction, and I bought even a car, so I don't know why I'm here.